Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Ruby live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I am the Director of Culinary Instruction, as well as one of the instructors in your courses. And specifically today, I'd like to invite you to my office hours. And this is my opportunity to answer any of the food and cooking related questions that you might have. And as I take a look at the home page here, I see a number of questions pre-populated, and I want to thank everybody for their early participation. I also want to mention as we get started that if you would like to participate more directly, you're welcome to submit a question or a comment. And you can do that by looking at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and you'll see a dialog box that says Add Question Here. And feel free to add again a comment or a question, and that'll make its way to the queue. The second thing that I like to mention is that if you look at the pre-populated questions, in each one you'll see a heart-shaped icon in the upper right-hand corner of that individual box. And if you would like a particular question answered sooner than later, feel free to click on the heart-shaped icon and that'll push it up in priority. Otherwise, I'll answer the questions. All righty, let's go ahead and get started. We'll jump into the first question, and this is from Larry, who says, do you have a favorite or recommended recipe for whole wheat pizza crust? Advice for cooking all veg pizza in a home oven? And thanks so much. Thank you very much, Larry, for this question. I like pizza, and we eat a fair amount of it at home. So let me share with you a couple of thoughts and my experience as I approach pizza at home. And this is something that you can do too. So first of all, in terms of a favorite recipe that's whole wheat, just offhand, no. I would say that if you have a favorite crust recipe that's based on, the typical white flour, go ahead and start with that. And start to swap out the whole wheat flour, in the place of the white flour. And depending on what you're after, you can try a couple of different stages. Maybe you do a 50-50 version as you make adjustments, or maybe you want to just jump on into a 100% whole wheat version of the pizza crust. To begin with, let me also say that I'm going to at least in my mind, I'm thinking that it's going to be whole wheat and not some other, let's say, non-gluten whole grain. Okay. So your substitution should be fairly easy. The one thing that you'll need to adjust is the water. Okay. So the bran in whole grains is thirsty and it wants to consume more water. So that's the adjustment that you're going to have to make for any recipe that you convert yourself. And it may take, a couple, three go rounds, right, in terms of some kitchen testing to get it to the point where you like the hydration. But that's the main thing. This is true of other breads as well. If you start to add whole wheat, then you need to increase the moisture because the bran wants to drink more. Okay. And, otherwise whole wheat flour has plenty of gluten. It's a generally high gluten flour. Now, the other difference is that all the bran pieces, in the grind, they have little sharp edges and they will cut the strands of gluten. So there's a little bit of a trade-off here, or it's just something to keep in mind, and that is that you want to just try to develop that gluten, sufficiently, keeping in mind that the degree of bubbliness, depending on the style of pizza you make, might be a little bit less, possibly, with 100% whole wheat crust because of the way that the bran acts within that mixture of the dough. Okay. Moving on to the other part of your question, any advice for an all-veg pizza? I'm going to talk a little bit about pizza in general, and so you can make it however you want. I'm going to tell you the way that I have our home style oven set up. And I recommend this approach. Uh, we have a steel plate that is a 1/4 inch thick. Although if I were to do it again, I might consider 3/8 of an inch, but a 1/4 inch works fine. And I went down to the steel yard and took the measurements of our oven rack and had them cut a piece of steel to fit the oven rack. And I cleaned it off. It was just something that was sitting out, and it needed some cleaning up and smoothing out the edges and the corners. And then I seasoned it, oiled it, put it in the oven to let it bake for a couple of rounds to create, a seasoned surface. And then when pizza time comes along, I position the rack at the very top, so it's just a little bit beneath the broiler. And the steel plate goes onto that rack in the top position. And I will preheat the oven for at the highest temperature. So in our case, it's about 550 degrees Fahrenheit. And the preheating time is about 45 minutes. You might be able to get away with a little bit less, and a little bit more, of course, is fine. And once that plate is sufficiently preheated, you'll assemble your pizzas, and they should be ideally a thin crust pizza, okay, for this method. And so again, they can be any sort of toppings that you want, as long as it remains a thin crust pizza. And you put the pizza in. And then at that, I guess it could be a moment before you put the pizza in, turn the oven off and turn the broiler on high. Okay, so when the pizza goes in, you get lots of heat from the bottom and the top. And you're going to cook that pizza in somewhere between 90 seconds and 120 seconds. We find that to be sufficient. Okay, and so let's say you're doing a batch of dough, and depending on how big you roll them out, you're going to get multiple, probably, right, pizza discs out of that. We often get about 8 pieces or so out of the piece of dough that we prepare. So as you're baking through these, just maintain that same setting of a hot pan that you had preheated and the broiler on high, and you're going to get lots of heat from the top and bottom, in these 1.5 to 2 minute cycles. And adjust it as you need to get the browning of the crust that you like, the crispiness. And I find the results to be great. We've been doing this for several years now. And when I started doing this, I visited pizzerias that focused on this Neapolitan style thin crust pizza, and went down to, I'm in the Portland, Oregon area. I traveled to Seattle, down to San Francisco, visited a handful of restaurants that had the Italian government designation of making authentic Neapolitan style pizzas. And what we were producing at home was equivalent to what I was paying lots of money for in those restaurants. So I'm confident that you too, Larry, and others that are listening to this discussion can prepare pizzas that are delightful and satisfying. But it will take a little bit of experimentation to dial that process in for you. Thank you. Okay, next up from Sarah. Look at that. You got 5 clicks on the heart icon, and Sarah's question bumps up here. Sarah says, please describe some of your best techniques for cooking tofu. Well, so let me start by saying that tofu is a neutral flavored, largely speaking, right? It's a neutral, very, very, very light flavored ingredient. Depending on the style of tofu you choose, it can be more or less neutral, and more would be a beany flavor. And I find that the stronger flavors come with the more dense styles of tofu. and the delicate flavors come with the more delicate textured tofus, like the silken tofu, for example. Now, it's important to keep in mind that as a neutral sort of an item, tofu can be aligned with just about anything. Whether it's an appetizer or a salad, it could be a savory entree, it could be a dessert, because it takes on flavors so easily and so readily. Okay, while imparting its texture and its nutritional goodness. Okay, now at home here, we have miso soup almost every day. Certainly during the school year, it's at least Monday through Friday, and tofu is one ingredient in that soup. And so it's I recommend that. Okay, maybe not every day, but give that a try. Add it to curries. We'll do this once in a while when we want to make a plant-based. Maybe it's an Indian paneer, like a saag paneer preparation, where typically you're using cheese, right? A type of cottage or fresh cheese in its place. You can easily use a medium firm, let's say, a texture of tofu, and that takes on those flavors very nicely. In a similar way, we'll do the Chinese style mabo tofu. And in place of the ground pork, we'll use tofu. You can just grab it and crumble it with your hands, and you get these nice irregular pieces in that mixture with all the other vegetables. And in that setting also, it takes on so much of those flavors. So in a similar manner, you can add tofu to any stews or soups or other simmered, liquidy dishes that you might prepare. It is common to fry tofu, whether it's deep frying or pan frying. Now, in which case I recommend that it be dredged in flour, because otherwise it tends to stick to pans. And when it comes to the frying techniques, whether it's pan frying or deep frying, it is traditional or customary to protect the outer surface of whatever it is that you're frying with dredging. So that's a function or a purpose of the dredging in this case. So think about any of the places where you might try some sort of frying, and it could be to make croutons for a salad, or to add a little firm, sometimes crunchy on the outside, but then soft on the inside component to whatever it is that you can think of. Okay. We have a simple recipe in our Rouxbe lineup that appears also in a lesson or two, in an assignment or two, where we give the students the option of marinating the tofu in the form of steaks, just large pieces that you simply slice off the block, in which case you're going to use a firmer version, so it'll maintain its texture through the handling. And that can be dredged or not, especially if you're using a non-stick pan, and it'll be browned, and then you can serve that with an accompanying sauce or condiment. It can be a main component of a meal or a side, and you could the accompaniment could be something a little bit more involved, like some sautéed mushrooms and garlic and onions and maybe some other vegetables that you then nappe over the top of that tofu steak. And so that's another very nice way to handle tofu. That's very simple. The marinating could be as little as a half an hour to impart a little bit of flavor. You can always make the marinade more concentrated if your time is short, or you can marinate it overnight. And practice. The cooking involves experience. So, I call it practice, but it is your experience building, where if you want to extend the marination time, you might make the marinade a little bit less intense, unless the results are suitable to whatever outcome that you desire. Okay. So what I provided here, Sarah, are some high level sort of framework, approaches to handling tofu. I hope you'll give it a try, knowing that it's a very versatile sort of an item. Let me just throw out one last idea, which is a traditional way of eating silken tofu, the very soft textured tofu in Japan during the summertime. And that is to put out a cube, however big, however much you want to eat, so however big you want it, of tofu on a plate. And on top of that, you can grate some daikon, some radish of that sort, along with some ginger, and you place that right on top of the tofu and drizzle some soy sauce over the top. And that is a great component to a meal as well. You get some very obvious flavors from the components that you add, the condiments. And you should also use a nice quality tofu where you're getting some of the subtle flavor from that main item. And this is a great example of how the subtlety of foods are emphasized in a lot of Japanese cooking. And this is something easy for you to try out. All right. Thank you very much. Next up, we have a question from Melissa, who says, would you define and elaborate on the concept of building layers of flavor, both theoretically and practically? I would like to gain a clear understanding of both the concept and implementation of it. Okay. So yes, we talk about, or at least mention in some fashion or another, this idea of building flavors as you cook. And let me just jump into some practical methods, and maybe from that some of the theory will come out of that. But different categories of ingredients. Maybe this is the theory here. Different categories of ingredients provide different types of flavors, and as we add these ingredients from these different categories, they stand out on their own, yet at the same time, of course, they meld with the adjacent flavors. And so you have this complication of flavor that emerges, and this is the result of this layering effect. Okay. And when I say complication, hopefully that's not a muddling of flavors, but something more harmonious. And to begin with, think about browning, the application of dry heat to caramelize sugars, or to develop browning through the Maillard process, but browning of the foods, which adds flavor. And so often that'll be a first step that we use as we saute an item, for example. And then beyond that, as we look at the different ingredient categories, it could be spices that are used, or herbs, whole spices or ground, fresh spices or fresh herbs or dried. Okay. And citrus zest could be used. Citrus juice can be used. Vinegars, right, as a category, have many different flavors to offer, along with the acidity or the sourness that comes along with that category of ingredients. So you can pick and choose a vinegar that is aligned with the ingredients that you're using, or the regional cuisine profile, right, that you're preparing, or maybe it's simply what you like. Okay. And of course there's salt and pepper as very basic. Let me say salt. Okay, we'll separate the pepper. We'll put that in the spice category. But there's salts as well, and many salts are fairly neutral in their flavor. If you get a kosher salt, kosher style salt, it tends to be fairly neutral in flavor. But if you get some of these regionally specific salts, sometimes they're categorized as finishing salts. I think because the price tag is higher and we associate them with just that last little bit of seasoning adjustment prior to service. finishing the dish before consuming it. This could be the fleur de sel, which is this first little bloom of salt that emerges on the salt pans as the water evaporates from the sun. That's collected. It's very delicate before we get down to some of the larger or heavier crystals. There's red salts from Hawaii that are colored by the minerals that are in the clays and the soil adjacent to that salt. And the salts come from so many places, and they all have different flavors. And so you can pick and choose your salt as well. Okay. And so the use of each of these ingredients from the categories that I just mentioned will lend a different facet or layer of flavor that all sort of builds up and amalgamates into this finished product. Of course, I guess a couple of big categories I can't overlook will be the alliums, right? So you've got onions and garlic and leeks and scallions and chives and many more items in that category of ingredients that are commonly used throughout the world. And then the last thing I'll mention here is you have the main ingredients that comprise the dish that you're making. And if you can choose the most flavorful items, your palate will be most satisfied in the end. And sometimes, we need to look for those things, like at local farmers markets. Sometimes if we have the opportunity to grow our own food, then you have a chance to play around with these different varieties of beets or different varieties of tomatoes or beans or whatever it happens to be. And so keep those things in mind, right, as you're producing a dish, and be very mindful of the nuances that emerge in terms of the different flavors. And I think that this process of developing flavor will become a little more clear to you. Thank you. All right, next up from Kathleen. If you do use oil in stir fry veggies, is avocado oil any better than olive oil? When it comes to oils, from a culinary standpoint, well, maybe two things I guess come to mind. From a culinary standpoint, think about the smoke point and what it is that you're making. Refined oils are going to have sufficiently high smoke points that you can choose anything you want. And the avocado oils that I've come across are refined, and they've got super high smoke points like canola oil or other more common or mainstreamed oils. Many olive oils have, especially mainstreamed olive oils, have fairly high smoke points as well. And so you can do a lot of different cooking with them, but just do be cognizant of when they do start to smoke and then back off of that. I have also used over the years, olive oils that come from very small producers that have very little filtering done to them. And so you can see this particulate, that's in suspension, and it adds these beautiful colors and aromas. And they also burn easier. So, you want to be careful of some of those oils that you might choose. But otherwise, think about the accompanying flavor. So avocado oil is pretty neutral in flavor, again, just like canola oil, whereas olive oils can vary quite a bit depending on the specification of that oil or the details of that oil. So it's going to be up to you at that point, okay, to choose an oil that you might prefer. But I don't have any problems using either avocado oil or olive oil if one or the other is presented to me. Thank you. So the question about what kind of salt to use, and the quick answer is any kind of salt that you're comfortable with, okay? There are flavored salts, these obviously flavored salts with ghost pepper or with curry powder or something else. So let's put all those to the side and just focus on regular salt that comes from the ocean or from the earth in some way. I would say any of those are fine. Um, and so long as it suits your palate and other factors around acquiring that salt. Okay. Many recipes call for a neutral salt, like a kosher style salt. But there's not much flavor associated with that. If you were to use what might be called, an artisan salt, or, let's just call it something made in a smaller batch production method from someplace. And I've had many from around the world, and they have beautiful flavors from all the minerals that are present, and they taste good, and they add really more interest to the food. And so if you're going to reach for something like that, I think it's probably a good thing. As I mentioned earlier in today's program, many of those salts are categorized as finishing salts, and they command a higher price tag, unfortunately. I think if one's budget can handle the use of that sort of salt on a daily basis, that's the way to go, because it really is flavorful in a natural sort of way. Okay. But I don't, I don't have any issues in terms of my pickiness toward what kind of salt to use. And so I leave it to you, Tamara, to maybe test out, two or three or four kinds. For example, at my local grocery store, I've seen a set of six or so different salts in small quantities that's sold. And if you can find something like that, it's an easy way to try out some different salts, without spending too much money and without having large quantities of salt in the cupboard. All right. Enjoy the process. Thank you. Next up, Michael says, I heard several approaches to the use of salt while cooking, adding salt while cooking, others about using it only for finishing. Are there scenarios where both are a healthy way to cook? I think that if one has a concern about the added salt, right, to their cooking, then simply be aware, however you do that, whether it's measuring it out ahead of time as part of your mise en place and not exceeding that, or otherwise, kind of keep an eye on how you use the salt during your cooking, whether it's again during the cooking process or just in addition afterwards. And I think you can manage it at that point at a whatever might be considered healthy for you. Okay. Now the difference is, okay, between these two approaches, if you're adding salt multiple times during the cooking process, then the salt has an opportunity to be absorbed into the components of the food and to sort of marry with all the other flavors in the pot. And arguably, you're going to get a more balanced end result compared to waiting to the end and just adding the salt prior to service, where it's all going to be on the surface of the food, and it's going to be a slightly different palate effect. Some people may notice that more than others. Again, it will depend upon the individual consumer. But again, in terms of a healthful approach to moderating salt use, you can go either way, I would say. But it's going to be up to you to keep track of how much salt you use. Okay, thank you. And Mark asks, is vegetable broth one of the better substitutes for olive oil when sauteing veggies and scrambling eggs? I think it certainly can be. If you want to use, especially for the saute method, right, you want to use a liquid to deglaze the pan and loosen things up, then a flavorful liquid. So if you're on a plant-based diet, then vegetable stock, right, or vegetable broth. These are synonymous terms, would be a fine ingredient to use. And keep in mind that it could be water if you don't want to impart any additional color or flavor. So, taste the vegetable broth on its own to see if those tastes and flavors are what you want, to emerge as one layer of flavor that you develop in the sauteed onions, for example. Okay, thank you. Another question from Michael. I've heard that flavors depend on various components that have different vapor pressures. How do I best determine when to add a spice and the temperature a dish is served at? Okay, we're getting into chemistry and probably some other aspects, some of the other fields of science here. I'm going to sort of redirect this back to really just cooking. And I'm not familiar with vapor pressures of foods. And when it comes to serving temperature, I'll comment just very briefly that, hot foods are going to be molecularly more active. So they're throwing off more molecules. And so you're going to get more aroma off of a hot food versus a cooler food, and especially compared to something that's chilled. Okay. So this is why when we eat a cold food, we tend to flavor it a little bit more strongly than a hot counterpart. Okay. Now, other than that, when it comes to, let's see, spices, a common way to handle spices, and this is sort of a general pattern you might see in a lot of Indian dishes, is to use whole spices at the first step, and we get those in the pot, traditionally with oil. But if you don't want to use oil, you don't have to. But that's going to bring out some subtle flavors from the whole spices, because relatively speaking, relative to ground spices, there's less surface area. Okay. And then later on in the cooking process, ground spices are used to add a little more stronger punch, or in the form of the next layer of flavor. Okay, with ground spices, that continues its simmering process. And then very often, to finish a dish, whole spices, sometimes in combination with ground spices, okay, are going to be bloomed in hot oil and then added to the dish right at service time. And then you get the freshest layer of flavor, or that hit of aroma, okay, as the dish is consumed. And so this is one way to create layers of flavor, using a single category of ingredient, in this case spices, and then thinking about whole versus ground. So hopefully some of this is helpful to you, Michael, as you think about how to approach a dish around, in using spices. But I think for a lot of cooks who don't have experience using spices, simply adding spices to your food, whether it's a cold food, room temperature, or a hot food, is going to make a lot of difference to your eating experience and the enjoyment at the table. So without getting into vapor pressures, hopefully this will get you down the path of some more interesting and flavorful cooking. Thank you. And next up from Tony, is spelt flour better to use than wheat flour for those avoiding gluten? What flours would you recommend for those trying to avoid gluten? Spelt, if I recall, does have some gluten in it. It's again, if I recall correctly, it's a fairly close cousin to wheat. So I don't know. I don't know how the gluten, that particular protein amount, would compare to different types of wheat and wheat flour. You can probably look that up, on the interwebs. And So if you want to avoid gluten, then just go for a gluten-free blend. And this is going to depend or other gluten-free flour. And it all depends on what you're making. If you want something to mimic the gluten in wheat flour, such as when baking, then I recommend using a gluten-free flour blend that's already established, like maybe under the Bob's Red Mill brand, because all that's been tested in their kitchens to do certain things, to make a pizza crust or to make a quick bread or to make a yeast bread. So you don't have to spend hours and hours, recreating the gluten-free flour wheel. Pardon me? Yeah, otherwise, if you're talking about singular types of flour, there are many, many to choose from. Any of these other grains, like quinoa, it could be chickpeas, chickpea flour, all of these are gluten-free, and they are available at stores, or you can grind your own if you just want a single ingredient additive or addition, to something that you're making, like a pancake, in the morning for breakfast. I hope you'll give it a try. Thank you very much. Next up, from Anna Marie. Will a pizza stone work for your cooking method? My stone's about 30 years old and well seasoned. Yeah, give it a try. The pizza stones are intended to mimic the old stone ovens, right? The bottom substrate or surface being, stone of some sort. I've used some pizza stones with success, and others hold the heat for a shorter period of time and might get a couple of pizzas nicely browned before the crust starts to lighten up a bit in color. But give it a try and see how you like the results. Thank you. And another question from Melissa. Would you speak to the idea of knowing how to not overcomplicate a dish, but still build layers of flavor to make a truly delicious dish? So, this is a nuanced question or situation in that it really depends on what you're making. And on one hand, what the, let's say, traditional ways of making that dish are. And there's always a range, right, of how to make a dish. In other words, if we're talking about, an Indian curry of some sort, and you go to your favorite Indian restaurant and you have this dish and you love it, keep in mind that there are many, many, many different ways, flavor-wise, to make that dish. From home to home in India, to chef, in hotels across India. So, in other words, what is authentic is a slippery slope, but nonetheless, it comes with this range of correct answers. So you need to think about, what that looks like relative to the dish that you're making, and or what your own personal preferences are. If you're just experimenting, with something, in the kitchen. Okay. Overcomplication, I think, is going to be, relative to, how you like it. First of all, it could be a first impression. It could be the way your palate reacts 4 or 5 bites into that dish, or 5 or 10 minutes into the meal. Very often, if there's just so much activity on a plate or in a dish, we experience what we call palate fatigue, where we're just overloaded with strong flavors, and it gets sort of tiring to eat that given preparation. And what we need is to just back off. We shift to something very simple to cleanse our palate, and then we might come back to the dish at hand. And so think about this bigger picture that I'm trying to paint here of the cultural context of cooking, as well as our individual reaction to food, sometimes several bites or several minutes into a meal. Okay. And I think you can start to figure out what is still delightful to your palate and what is sort of wearing you out. All right. Give that a try and enjoy the process. Thank you. Next up from Razi. Are there frozen products available that align with whole food plant-based eating? Thinking along the lines of Gardein products and Dr. Prager's Veg Burgers and Morningstar. So let's talk about the definition of whole food plant-based eating, and it is on ideally, okay, it's going to focus on using whole, as in real food ingredient. When I say real food, I mean coming from the earth, ideally, right, in that original state or pretty close to that. I mean, the reality is most everything that we consume has been processed to some degree or another. And excuse me just a moment. So the whole food diet is in contrast to the highly refined diet. And all this food out in our world lies on a spectrum. And really, you get to choose, right, where you want to land, right, on this spectrum of food. Let me also interject my perspective on a similar term, and that is vegan or veganism or a vegan diet. I'm not a big fan of the term vegan because I've grown up with that term for many, many decades, and it is it's a politicized term. It is one that is aligned with animal rights and a lot of other stuff in society. The type of clothes you wear, the leather shoes you might avoid, these sorts of considerations. So I like whole food plant-based, right, as a term that I use, as a term that I identify with. But in terms of the vegan world of eating that has emerged over the last several decades, it has unfortunately come to rely strongly on processed foods. I mean, after all, a bag of potato chips is usually vegan. So is a pretzel. But those things aren't good for you. Yet many vegans eat lots of those sorts of highly processed foods. And, they talk about being plant-based in a certain sort of way, right, in parentheses. So when we look at things like, the Gardein products, commercially made veg burgers and Morningstar meat analog products, those are more highly processed than a pot of beans and sweet potatoes and spices and herbs that you might use to make your own veg burger, but less processed than a bag of pretzels, let's say. So you get to decide. I mean, that's the beauty, right? No one has there's no such thing as a universal definition, okay, of what a plant-based diet ought to look like. It is highly individualized, and it could be based on so many competing factors too. Maybe on the weekends, when you have more time to cook, you really drill down on some of these whole food ingredients like beans and greens and grains. That take longer to cook, more effort on your part. But during your busy week, you rely upon some of these faster cooking convenience items. I'm not here to judge. It's going to be totally up to you to kind of find that sweet spot. In other words, the balance, right, that works for you and your family. Okay, and so I hope that you will also think about, excuse me again, a personal food philosophy, which can be very helpful in creating a North Star, right, or a guiding light to help you maneuver through these times, these decision processes. And some of us have religion, some of us have spirituality. I think part and parcel to all of that should be a food philosophy. And again, this is individual and something that you may or may not talk about with others. But if you decide, that you want to approach your health and your lifestyle in a certain way, and then sort of stay that course. And that means that you might make sacrifices in other areas of your life to spend more time doing the food prep. Just as some people sacrifice certain things on certain days of the week to go to their place of worship without fail. We get to make these decisions. And that's it makes for a beautiful thing, because it really sets your roots deeper around your beliefs, around what food ought to be, how farm workers are treated, how animals are cared for, how you spend time procuring your food or producing your food, and what your ultimate lifestyle around food is going to look like. And so that's a big one to bite off, but I hope you'll give that some consideration as well. Thank you. All right, and Annette, I'm tired of the typical meat and potatoes meal that are easy but have become boring. How do you approach preparing an interesting meal that is delicious and healthy? I would say start reaching for some plant-based dishes to mix it up at the table. You're arguably going to get much, much more variety in your diet from the plant world of things. And if you start to look at the ways that this is done, and I always think in terms of global food culture and where I want to eat tonight. Gosh, should we go to Mexico, meaning just in the kitchen here, or something from Japan or India or someplace else, in terms of the exciting flavor profile that I might choose. And I think in this way, one can pretty easily add variety, and hopefully some degree of interest and deliciousness and healthfulness at the table. And if you're still eating meat and potatoes because you have people at the table that enjoy that kind of food, that's fine. Just start to maybe swap something out and and replace it with something that's all plant-based, or increase the number of plant-based dishes at the table, to start to get others at the table to experiment and develop their palate around dishes that are meat-free, and then eventually maybe even a meal once in a while that is animal-free. This is a fun way to do that. And I hope we'll give that a try. Thank you. And next up from Annette again, who says, Pompeian makes extra virgin olive oil. One bottle says robust, and the other bottle says smooth. Is there any difference between these two, or is this a marketing ploy? Now, I don't have any memory of having Pompeian olive oil. I'm not saying I haven't had it. I just don't remember having it. So I can't comment on what they do under their labels. But generally speaking, I'll say that olive oils come in many different styles in terms of what you experience on the palate. And it's going to be based upon the type of olive that's used, or the blend of olives that are used, as well as the maturity of the olives, and the place of origin, the terroir, right? The soil and all those climatic conditions that affect the flavors in the developing fruit. And all of that is going to be translated to the oil. So, for a robust oil, yeah, I can definitely imagine, because there are certainly under other brands oils that are very peppery on their finish, with a little peppery burn, in other words. Some are very grassy in a sort of an underripe sort of way. Others are a little maybe buttery, you might say. They're very smooth on the palate without any prickly sensations in the throat. Um, and so I can definitely see that the Pompeian brand also would offer different styles of olive oil. And Annette, I would suggest that you pick up a bottle of each one and then just give them a try side by side, so you understand the similarities and the differences, and then try those on different foods to see how you like those interactions. That's a great way to get to know these different food categories, is to do these side by side comparisons. Thank you. All right, next up from Anne Marie. I have been whole food plant based for 4 years, but still cook for my family a healthy version of the standard American diet. My pantry, cupboards, and fridge and freezer are a work in progress. Do I simply upload pictures as they are? So you must be referring to the kitchen reset assignment that appears in at least a couple of our assignments. And here, we ask that you provide a description of what it is that you have done to prepare for the course. And as far as the photograph goes, you can take the picture of however it is that you have prepared for the course. So it could be just as is, with a pot roast right in front there. Or if you've done something else in terms of rearranging or maybe procuring some extra beans or whatever it is that you've done, that's perfect. There is really no wrong answer. After all, it is your experience with the course. We are here to provide some encouragement, some feedback, and some food for thought along the way. So go ahead and upload those pictures, but please provide the context right in the description. And the description for each of our assignments, but starting with the kitchen reset, is a very important part of each of the assignments. And we rely upon that greatly as we take a look at how it dovetails with the photos that you submit. Okay, we want this to be a low stress experience. We want you to feel the joy of cooking. So please don't be self-conscious in any way, but look forward to creating your own journey and how you want these changes to unfold. And let me put this into context here. We have all kinds of students that come to our plant-based courses. Some folks want to completely jettison animal-based ingredients, and they do it cold turkey, 100% cleanse, right? They put it in the dumpster or they give it away or whatever. And then we have other people that have no intention of omitting animal-based ingredients. Instead, they just want to learn to cook more plant-based dishes right at the table. And then there's so many situations in between. And so again, please, find the path of least resistance for you and enjoy the process. Thank you. Next up from Wendy or Wenda, I'm not sure, who writes, I enrolled in the professional plant-based course in 2019 and had to stop at 88% complete due to mobility issues. At 70 plus, I want to do as much as I can and not worry about the grade and not feel guilty. I have learned a lot with the courses I have taken. Yeah, excellent. So this is really a great topic here to touch upon after the last one, in saying that we have a lot of different students that come to us with a lot of different motivations and interests and desired outcomes from their experience with Rouxbe. And if you're coming to our courses, they're all going to be graded. But if you can step back and disconnect yourself from the grade that you might get and just look at the feedback that the instructors provide you, then it's going to be a great experience, for your situation. So yeah, no problems at all from our end. We do ask that you please, for your own experience, we hope that you do the cooking exercises, the assignments, and submit them. And we're here to provide feedback that is hopefully helpful to you as you continue down your path of deepening the joy of cooking. And yeah, we'll see you on the flip side. Thank you. And look at this, another question from Annette, who says, how long do we have to complete our course? I signed up for the Cook's Roadmap and Introduction. Each of our courses has a different duration depending on just how long it is. And offhand, I don't remember what the Cook's Roadmap duration is. But please write us in at support@rouxbe.com, and we can look that up for you and let you know. Okay, thank you. And Maria, hello Maria, so nice to see you. Maria writes, I have purchased some kala namak, black salt. Do you ever use it? Do you use it ever? Yes, we have black salt in this form, the kala namak in the cupboard, and it has a lot of minerals and things in it to give it its pinkish color and its sulfur notes. And this is one reason why kala namak is used to mimic the flavor of eggs, where an egg-forward dish might be prepared, such as with an eggless frittata that might be based on tofu or something else. And so give it a try, just in different preparations, and see how you like it. Always try it on its own. I always recommend trying every ingredient on its own, just to get an idea of what it tastes like and what sort of taste or flavor it might lend to the food that you're preparing. Thank you. Next up from Diane, who says, in the course, a magnetized honing knife sharpener, right, a steel, was recommended. What do you think about ceramic honing tools? A salesman at a knife shop told us that the ceramic is harder than the steel. Ceramic is great. Yeah, I've used that a lot. There's the ceramic honing rods. Some are round, and others have kind of a football sort of a shape to them, cross section. But those work great as well. Yeah, I can go with either category. Thank you. Hello, Victoria. Let's see. I will be moving to a new house soon that has an electric oven. Using gas my whole life, I'm dreading it. Any tips you might have would be appreciated. I would say you're going to have a pretty smooth transition. Let's see. The difference between gas and electricity is that a byproduct of gas combustion is water, whereas electricity doesn't have any of that. So the environment arguably is a little bit drier, but I think the transition is going to be pretty smooth for you. Go ahead and try out a couple of your favorite things in the oven and just see, right, if you recognize some difference in the cooking time, and then go from there in terms of adjustment. Yeah, no need to dread. Enjoy. Thank you. And Michael says, any advice to an aspiring cook that is a perfectionist and often focuses on details that do not matter? Are there cooking skills that matter the most so I can focus on those? Well, I think in any kitchen, we need to understand cooking methods and how to apply a cooking method, whether it's in the dry category or the moist category, or in the middle, we have these combination cooking methods. I think it's a foundational stone, a building block to understand cooking methods. And really, as you move through one of our courses, these different categories, that we offer as cooking methods, and there's, how to use spices and how to use herbs and how to cook this or cook that. Really, each one of those categories becomes a building block to your foundation. And what do you build on top of the foundation? Well, it's the rest of your life of cooking. It's all the refinement, right, that you're going to figure out as you experience more and more things in the kitchen. And this is going to be different types of dishes from different parts of the world, using different ingredients in different quantities, using different types of cookware. All of this brings these different experiences, right, in the kitchen. And yeah, I think the other part is hopefully with time that right, we relax a little bit more and focus on the joy, right? The joy of cooking. For a lot of people, it's a way to decrease stress, to unwind. It doesn't always start that way, right? As we're getting used to a new this or a new that. And that's true of any discipline, right? If you're learning to play the flute or play basketball, you're going to put in lots and lots and hours of hours learning the basics. It's very clumsy at first, but finally, at some point, you sort of realize one morning that, hey, all of this stuff sort of comes together a little more harmoniously, and it's funner than it used to be. And that's that joy that's emerging, the joy of making music, the joy of playing a sport, or the joy of cooking. And so I hope you will allow that process to unfold and, to just finally recognize it, down your path at some point. Thank you. And another question from Razi, who says, can you talk about rice? We love rice as a side dish or for stir fries. Transitioning to brown rice did not go over well at our house. Any ideas for making yummy rice that's not unhealthy? So this is an interesting question. And this can, I feel for you, okay? I grew up in rice culture. And, growing up, it was always white rice. That's all I knew. And I still like white rice. And arguably, there are probably some preparations out there that I will insist at least once in a while preparing with white rice, because I really want to experience that old flavor experience that I grew up with, or that I have when I visit Japan or wherever those places are. Okay. When it comes to transitioning to brown rice for rice people, I'll say, okay, culturally, right? People that grew up with rice as the staple food. It takes a conscious effort and willingness up here. Okay. And I will talk about right now the psychology, okay, of food. And that is that I believe that with so many things in life, that these sort of changes are 90% mental, okay? The 10% is just doing the work. A lot of the blocks, the difficulties, right, the lack of motivation that we have around something new, whether it's an exercise program in the new year or cooking brown rice, right, is focusing on the change, and the change is often highlights what it is that, like in the case of food, it's what we no longer have. It's a different flavor, right? We have this flavor, but not that one. But we focus on this one because of the nostalgia, because of the immediate past memories that we have, or maybe the distant past memories that we have. And if you can start to make this effort up here to enjoy what you do have in the richer, deeper flavors, the nuttier flavors, the greater mouthfeel of the chewiness of brown rice or any other whole grains, and find the enjoyment in that, because there really is a lot of extra flavor that can be quickly discerned and hopefully enjoyed with these whole grains. Um, and then go for it, right? We need to add those other things in there that create the dish, herbs and spices, and depending on what it is that you're making, sometimes there's some caramelization that might be involved. Maybe we might finish something with a little splash of acidity through, some vinegar to balance fattiness that we might add from some other ingredients. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's a lot of goodness, again, as I mentioned, in the mouthfeel, as well as the deeper flavors that we get out of whole grains versus their more refined counterparts. Try to do this, with those at the table. But again, maybe it also means occasionally preparing that favorite dish in its white rice form, just to keep everybody excited about this new path that you're taking them down. I hope you'll give it a try. Thank you. And lastly, we have a question from Paula, who says, hello. I just purchased some black garlic bulbs. I've never used it before. How's it different or the same as white garlic? Do you have any advice for how and when to use it? So the black garlic that I have had is meant fermented, and with that comes age and a lot of change, right? And so it has this sweetness that emerges, along with a garlic backdrop that it hangs on to. The texture is a little bit softer, but still retains some firmness, just like a lot of fermented foods do. And, I have used it as a condiment, so it'll be at the table with something. But, you might try to blend it in with a dressing that calls for fresh garlic and see how you like those results. Try incorporating it, into whatever it is. It could be a stir fry, it could be a soup, something where you're going to notice the different subtle flavors, that come along with the black garlic. Again, I'm what I'm thinking of is a fermented variety here. If you're thinking about a fresh variety that's black, I'm unfamiliar with that. But just try replacing garlic in some preparations where the garlic flavor is forward, so you can notice the difference in that key ingredient that you're using there. I hope you'll give it a try. Thank you. And this brings to a conclusion today's program. And I want to thank all of you for joining me for my office hours and your live event, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.